This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Fast forward into the future or bring a touch of the past to your layout with Rapido GP20 tank cars from Home Shops. Deliver clean and safe water to areas in critical need, just like the prototype with water-trained tank cars. These models represent a new, innovative solution to help solve water shortages across North America. Also available from Home Shops, Gargle Oil GP20 tank cars. This industry was a cornerstone of Frank Ellison's Delta lines, and these cars feature a classic 1970s look that pays tribute to the legacy of this inspiring freelance layout. Learn more about these cars and see the entire Home Shops catalog at homeshops.net. If you own a protothrottle, it's time to upgrade your fascia with TullyModels.com fascia protothrottle holders. Experience safe, one-handed operation of your protothrottle and easily shift from engineer to conductor in a snap. With 4 available configurations to choose from, including integrated cup and pick stick holders, Tully Models has a holder for you. Don't have a protothrottle? No problem. TullyModels.com has fascia holders for Digitrax and NCE throttles and holders for your smartphone too. Check out the entire lineup at TullyModels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. As I prepare to enter the world of N-Scale and the collaboration with the Upload Express modelers, I thought it would be a good idea to learn about the world of 1/60th scale from someone who's well-versed in the topic. So on this episode, I'm pleased to be joined by the owner of DIY and Digital Railroad's YouTube channel and the host of Coffee and Trains. Raise your coffee mugs and welcome back to Around the Layout, Jimmy DIY. Good to see you, Jimmy.
Good to see you too, Ray. Happy to be here.
I'm so excited to dive into the world of N-Scale and do some learning. I built my T-Trak modules. I've got them all built downstairs. And that's about as far as I got because that's really carpentry. That doesn't really affect the scale. Now I need to dive into N-Scale. And before I really start to buy stuff that isn't 50-foot high cubes, I need to really get to an education on all of this and just make sure that I'm doing the right thing and making sure that all my HO scale knowledge isn't interfering with what I really should be doing in N scale. So I'm looking forward to diving into that with you on this episode.
Awesome. Sounds good. I will do my best to sway you to our side of the fence.
Well, let's start right there. Let's start with swaying towards your side of the fence. Let's talk about some of the advantages of N scale. I mean, we kind of know some of the obvious ones, but let's talk about them a bit. And let's talk about where N scale has been heading.
Well, I think you've really seen N-Scale grow to getting pretty close to parity with HO scale in a lot of things in terms of the amount of items you have, the amount of detail you have. It's going to blow your mind when you start buying some N-Scale rolling stock. I'm talking about like the Athearn Genesis, the Scale Trains Rivet Counter stuff, Tangent, Aurora miniatures, all of these. The detail is amazing. My new standard of detail is if the brake tips are painted silver, that's like my little indicator now on N-Scale. I was like, okay, they were serious about this. But with N-Scale, there's a few differences to when someone chooses to do N-Scale as well. And there's 3 main things that people that really go for N-Scale go for. One is that if you don't have a ton of space, but you still want decent sized trains to run. So, you can get a good layout in roughly half the size of what you would get in HO scale because it's 54% the size. So you can either get a lot of run and a lot of track going, or you can have a smaller setup in an even smaller space. And that also goes into the fact that you can run longer trains. I've had a layout that was 10 by 7 that I could run 50 car trains on. And that's another thing. And then one thing that I think N scale actually beats HO scale in is the amount of modular standards that are coming out. There are all sorts of that, and we can go over that a little bit later, but there's a lot of things. So, and the one of the last things to talk about, I think I said three, but the last thing I talk about is that if you really like expansive scenery, if you really want to see not just the beginning of the mountain, but you want to see further up the mountain, or you want to see the whole mountain, it's just an example because I like modeling mountain railroads, but that's really where N scale shines, is that really expansive scenery.
Yeah, so it definitely avoids the heavier amounts of compression that are required in HO is how I'm interpreting that.
That's correct. Yeah. HO scale is, I think the saying is, you model O scale if you want to model locomotives, you model HO scale if you want to model trains, you model N scale if you want to model railroads. So now there are also there's compromises with every scale, but that's really the thing with N scale is you get that expansive feel to it.
Let's talk about how far N scale has come, because I dabbled with it probably in the early 90s and probably didn't also have the best of equipment to really represent N scale. But now, as I'm looking around, this stuff is awesome. And its capabilities just seem to just grow by the day and by release. I saw one locomotive, I put it on the track. The ditch lights worked on an N scale locomotive. It was wild to see.
Yeah, that's really what you've seen. You've seen all of the DCC technology get really crammed into that space. And the really cool thing that's happening now is a lot of DCC and N scale has been basically built around these drop-in decoders that have to fit a certain type of locomotive. So they're built to fit a certain set of locomotives. But now we're starting to get standards for connectors and N scale like HO scale has with like the 21 pin. We're getting Next 18 and E24 are the two ones that are really out there right now, and they're starting to get manufacturer support. And when you're talking about that, you're bringing in Soundtracks, ESU, Digitrax, all of these brands in there. They're able to make sound decoders that have all of the features that you see on HO scale decoders. And all you got to do is, it's a little bit harder because of the size, but you can get a lot of these cool features like those ditch lights. There's some that it's literally just, it's kind of a law of diminishing returns. Like you're just not going to get that on there, but there's a lot more features coming out. I now own 2 N-scale locomotives that have smoke. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's making its way into N-scale. There's some stuff that never will just because of physics, but there's a lot of cool stuff happening in N-scale.
Yeah, we'll dive into the choices that we have available to us a little bit later, but let's go back kind of to the beginning. And when you've made that decision that you're going to go 1/160th scale and dive in, where's some good places to start?
So there's a couple different things you can do. If I'm recommending someone, I always say get a starter set. Like if you're starting completely from scratch, get a starter set. And the reason that I say that, I think we all know, is that you're at least going to get the track, the train, and you're going to get a power supply. It's not where you're going to end up, but it gets you going. And with N-scale, at least here in North America, there's actually more options when you go to places like Europe and Japan. But really, Bachmann and Kato are going to be your options. And Bachmann, it's really close to, very, very similar to what their HO scale offerings are. You got the Easy Track. The sets may be named a little bit different, but they look very similar to their HO scale counterparts. Now, when you go into Kato, which is more of it's got a bit more of a premium feel, and they're really what I consider a gold standard of N-scale, and we can go more into that. But the sets you're getting the exact same locomotives and rolling stock that you would buy individually. You get Kato Unitrack, which is, in my opinion, the best track with roadbed of any scale out there. And you get a nice power supply. And plus with Kato, you also get a bunch of expansion packs, which is something you don't see a ton. And Kato also offers, if you already have track, you can buy sets of trains, whether it's their bookshelf passenger sets or their little freight sets that you can buy without power supply and all that. And you can buy these completed sets for them too. So if I'm starting, I'm definitely looking at those two companies, and I'm really I love them both. I have products from them both, but if I'm starting, if I can, I'm going to try to do Kato.
There's a name that Kato, and then some call it Kato, and some call it whatever. But there's a little bit of history or a little bit of lesson to be learned with that about pronouncing that name, isn't there?
Yeah, I get a lot of people. I've literally had comments on my YouTube videos. Someone like when I was just getting started, like literally yelled at me via all caps that it's Kato, and I'm like, well, I I, I actually asked the company, and it is Kato, but it's one of those things. It's like if you said Kato your whole life, it is totally fine. It's like all that matters is that you're having fun. So like if you're getting bummed out about a mispronounced name from like another one, it's like go touch grass. I don't know.
I'm sure Kato is certainly fine with them. You calling it Kato when you buy their products and take them home. You can call them whatever you want, I'm sure.
Exactly.
So once we get past the starter set, and I'll share that just recently, I took a trip out to the Chicagoland area, and I say I did the trifecta of hobby shops. I went to Des Plaines Hobbies, then I went up to Hiawatha Hobbies, and then I went down to Lombard Hobbies. All three had an amazing selection of N scale. But I'll be honest, it was like being in a jungle for me right now because there was just so much to look at and then trying to look at what brands and what's what. I mean, there's just an amazing amount of companies producing N scale stuff. Of course, we know the big ones and there's some smaller ones as well. It's a jungle out there. So let's talk a little bit about what's available for product. And we'll start with locomotives and talk about what features are best from each brand.
Right. So there's a couple of brands out there that really just mass produce. Some do both HO and N, and some are in specific. And then there's a couple of brands who are pretty close to the same of what they do with HO scale. And then there's a couple of brands who maybe do more rolling stock than locomotives. So the big mass producers in N scale are really going to be Kato is obviously one that I've talked about. And the big reason that they're really big is that they are actually a Japanese company and their subsidiary Kato USA handles the North American market. But N-Scale is the most popular in Japan. So that also leads to a bit of N-Scale influence. I can't count how many times I've been to a train show and at the N-Scale setup, you have a Shinkansen going around, a little bullet train going around. You'll see that a lot. But really, Atlas does a good job with rolling stock and locomotives. It is labeled identically to HO scale. So you have that silver, gold, and I believe it's master. I can't remember what they're exactly offhand, what all their tiers are, but it's identical to that.
Yeah, Train Man, I think, is one of them that Atlas has as well. Like they're kind of their entry level of sort
Correct.
locomotives.
Yeah.
I did
Yeah,
see that.
that's
Yep.
yeah, so that's what they have. And it's pretty much identical in scale. The other big mass producer of rolling stock is microtrains, which, if you don't know who microtrains are, they're basically the KD of N scale. They actually were the same company and they split off. And one
Hmm.
cool thing about microtrains, actually, if you're in the States, is that it is 100% made in America. So it's one of those companies where you can actually outfit all of your rolling stock fleet potentially with stuff that's made in Bend, Oregon. And they have their factory tours online. You can see how they make it. It's all 100% made in America.
Oh,
And their couplers are kind of the microtrains coupler is the N scale equivalent of the KD coupler. So it's the standard. That is the one you'll use a lot of times if you're looking for a replacement or to change out a coupler. You're going to go for a microtrains coupler. When you go to brands that are pretty much the same in N scale and HO scale, you're going to be looking at Scale Trains. Scale Trains does a terrific job in N scale, and their rivet counter stuff is phenomenal. I will also be forever grateful for them for bringing back the Fox Valley line because Fox Valley was one of my favorites. Broadway Limited does a really good job. I think they're one of the ones that, in my opinion, are really pushing innovation in N scale. They've come out with 2 locomotives so far that have smoke in N scale. Their Big Boy has smoke, and their Reading
wow.
T1 has smoke. And they're also bringing a Challenger and the Santa Fe with smoke. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. When you're looking at another brand that does it, what we've already talked about with starter sets is Bachman's higher tier stuff that they make is pretty close to their HO scale. They've got a little bit less, but their rolling stock is really good. Their couplers play nice with everyone else, so you don't have to worry about switching them out. That's another one that's pretty close to what their HO scale offerings are. And then you get into a set of brands that make a lot of stuff in HO scale, but it's a little bit less in N scale. Athearn is increasing their N scale. Their Genesis rolling stock is really up there with like Scale Train's rivet counter. I was amazed. I just got some of my first Genesis level Athearn rolling stock. And there's also a couple other brands that are smaller that I know that you have heard of and other people. Tangent makes in scale, Aurora Miniatures, Intermountain. Those are all in the game. Rapido does some in scale. I think a lot of times they actually make fun of themselves for every now and then when they do an in scale announcement, they'll actually be like, hey guys, we have in scale. But Intermountain does some locomotives and rolling stock. Their thing actually is they make really good metal wheel sets, and they're an in scale. They're ones if you're going to switch them out, it's usually you're doing Intermountain. Now, with the only really big brand that doesn't have skin in the game for in scale locomotives and rolling stock is Walthers, but they do have a lot of their cornerstone kits that you can buy and build in scale. So Walthers is the only one that's really not. They used to be, and I guess they're still a distributor for a lot of in scale with other brands, but they don't have any of their own in scale rolling stock.
You mentioned metal wheel sets, and in my world of HO, we change them out. The plastic wheels, if you happen to find something that still comes with plastic wheels, those go away and the metal wheels go on. Is that the same thing in N scale? Does that seem to be a standard, or what's the story behind that?
It's slightly different because Microtrains makes their stuff 100% with plastic wheels, and they do pretty well for the most part. But it is something that if I'm going to switch one thing out on a car, I am going to switch out for metal wheel sets. The other reason I do that is also because I put resistor wheel sets on my cars for block detection and crossing detection. But a lot of the more premium brands, they all have metal wheel sets. Scale Trains, Bachmann, Intermountain rolling stock, they pretty much all have metal wheel sets. So Microtrains is really the only one, but that's because they 100% manufacture it themselves, and it runs really well.
And then couplers, I know that you mentioned, for HO, KD is the standard. Microtrains, does that seem to be one of the things that you would recommend to do, is to change out couplers all to the same type of coupler, or does it seem to matter, or what are your thoughts on that?
So for the most part, you're going to see brands say that we have Accumate, Microtrains compatible, or Microtrains. So everyone tries to be compatible with Microtrains. And this is where I will give the only knock of this entire interview to Kato, which is they make amazing, rock solid, runs like a Swiss watch locomotives and rolling stock. Couplers aren't that great. And you can still make them work, but if you've ever done in scale and tried to run non-Kato stuff trying to connect to Kato couplers, you can have some issues. It'll still work. It just takes a little bit of finagling. So, but Microtrains also offers conversion kits for locomotives like that as well.
Well, I know one thing I have struggled in, I would have to really take some time and learn, is N-scale couplers, especially assembling Microtrains couplers. When I painted the ATLP 2022 interchange tour car, I took the couplers off and they went into multiple pieces. And I looked at them for a while and I tried so hard to try to figure it out. I picked them up, put them in my hand, and put them in a small baggie, zipped it up, and I drove from Connecticut to Bethlehem for the N-Scale National Convention, and I handed it to Dubobs of the infamous Dubobs YouTube channel. And I said, would you please put this on there for me? And he handled it, and he did very well with it. But I had to drive several hundred miles to somebody to get them to put an N-scale coupler on, because that was just something I didn't know how to put back together.
Yeah, and that is the one thing in N-scale that I will spend a little bit more money to get the pre-built ones, because I have big fat fingers and like I do N-scale and I can do like 90% of the things, but that is one thing. Like I have shot off so many. I'm in my little workshop office here. I've been on the floor of this office with my phone light looking for those little gold springs more times than I can count. Like you got your head on the floor looking for them. So yeah, that's the one thing I will spend a little bit extra to get them pre-built.
I'm very familiar with that, because that's about how I spend half of my model railroading time, is crawling around trying to find that one part, that one grab iron, that one thing that hit the floor. And no matter what seems to be the logical way it bounced, it seemingly ends up in the complete and total opposite direction. So yeah, spent a lot of time on my hands and knees trying to find things on the floor.
Yes, yeah.
So we've got some rolling stock, and we're kind of getting through the jungle there, looking at some different products that are available. And I think I've even saw some other names like Blueford shops, and I'm trying to remember some of the other ones that I saw that were on the shelves of these three hobby shops. So there's just a lot, amazing amount of availability in N scale when it came to that, and especially at these three shops. I was just blown away. Like, I didn't even know where to look, but it was really cool to find a lot of the stuff that I have in HO now available in N scale.
Yeah, it's really come a long way, and I can't believe I forgot to mention Blueford Shops because they're one of my favorites. They make really good cabooses, and they make some really good stuff. But it's one of those things that when you see that shelf, usually it's like, you got the rows because the HO scale boxes are a decent size, but all the little jewel cases for N scale, you're just kind of like your eyes go wide, and you're just like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And you got to start searching really tiny. And the person's like, can I help you? And it's like, I just need to find this. But yeah, so the availability has really, really risen a great deal to come pretty close to parity with HO scale. I like to tell people if a company has come out with it in HO scale, you can probably expect it in scale the next year or two.
Is it socially acceptable to wear an optovisor to a hobby shop to be able to help you out with this kind of stuff?
Well, if they say something about it, you shouldn't shop there anymore.
I guess. Yeah, that was part. It was part of the issue, because I mean, going through the shelves and trying to read the labels, and then what's what and what has come out, because I mean, we talk about these releases with Tony Cook and the what's happening in model railroading shows, but I'm so tuned to HO and what's come out in HO and know what to look for. It's now a different thing to try to find the N scale versions of things as well. But and then lots of selection out there. So I've got a lot of jungle searching to do, and it's going to be a lot of fun to try to match up and find some rolling stock that I'm going to really enjoy, and it's going to fit what I'm trying to do with my T-Trak modules. So let's talk about track. And we got to, obviously, all this rolling stock's got to run on some track. You talked about some starter sets, but let's dive a little deeper into track and what's available.
So there are basically divided up into two sections. You have track with roadbed and track without roadbed, just like most other scales out there. And with track without roadbed, you're really looking at Atlas, Pico, and Micro Engineering. Those are really your three biggest, and those are names that are in HO scale a lot too. So I use a lot of Atlas, and I've also used Pico a lot, as well as some Micro Engineering. You're going to see a little bit less of the hand laying track just because of the size factor. That's one thing that I'm like, yeah, if I want to do some hand laying of track, I'd probably just make something small in HO scale, because I think I would just probably get frustrated. But in terms of like track code and size, some of the equivalencies you're looking at here is code 100 in HO scale. The equivalent is really code 80 in scale. And then code 83 in HO scale is really code 55 in scale. And there's a bunch of other codes. It's like in HO scale, I think you can go down to like code 40 or something like that, which is really low. But when you're looking at the ones with roadbed, a lot of times you're going to see it with code 80. You're going to see Bachmann Easy Track in code 80. You're going to see Kato Unitrack in code 80. I haven't used Atlas True Track, which is, I want to say it's code 65. It's a different one, but that's a little bit different. But really, when you're looking at with roadbed, you're looking at Kato Unitrack and Bachmann Easy Track are going to be your most widely available. There is some compatibility between Kato Unitrack and like Tomix and Tomitech Track, but that's mainly a product that you can find more through like Japanese resellers and stuff rather than over here. If you're going to walk into a shop and find some track for in scale, you're probably going to find Bachmann Easy Track, Kato Unitrack, and your Atlas and Pico products. So that's the main thing you're going to find.
And how about turnouts?
So turnouts they're really similar to what you have in HO scale. You still have, like with Atlas, when you're starting out, you still have the snap switches and things like that. And you still got the numbered switches. The thing with when you get into turnouts, like let's say with Kato Unitrack, is the system is really well designed to be able to fit together like puzzle pieces. Their two main turnouts, they have a few others, but their two main turnouts are the number 6 and the number 4. And they don't straight diverge like you would with a normal turnout. They have a slight turn to them, and they have a radius of track that's an equivalent to them. But with turnouts, a lot of them are going to be the same. The big thing you're going to see, let's say you're putting in a tortoise switch machine. A lot of times you're going to put that on the like attached to the sidebar of the turnout throw rather than a lot of people that put it up to the middle of an HO scale module. You do have caboose ground throws that can work just like an HO scale. So a lot of things like that. There's a lot of similarities. Now, Kato Unitrack, all turnouts are ones that can be operated remotely. You just have to plug them in. They all come with a wire that you can run, and they can be run pretty much. They're pretty similar to ones like with Atlas snap switches and all that. They just have 2 wires instead of 3, and we're really getting inside baseball here. But they're all remote, be able to be remote operated, and they have a little throw bar on the side as well that can flip them.
I'm a big fan in the HO world of Pico turnouts because they're finger flick. And I believe that's the same case with Pico in the N scale world too. Is that right?
I think it is. Yeah, I think you are right on that.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool too. I like that ability, and it seems like that carries over to N scale as well. We're talking about Kato Unitrack, and that leads me to talk about modulars because that's where I'm heading with the T-Trak. But modulars, as you mentioned earlier in the show, seem to be pretty popular with N scale and a lot of availability and different standards to be able to take and build something, but then be able to meet up with some fellow N scalers and attach and build bigger railroads with it.
It's a really, really cool thing. And I would say it's the fastest growing modular standard right now. I get more people talking to me about building T-Trak modules than anything. And I think it's just because you can have a big layout and then just completely take it apart and store it. And it's there. The club that I'm a member of, the Central Carolina N-Scalers, they used to have their travel layout was the N-Track, which is the predecessor, which is a 3 wide, 3 tracks running across. And there's a few other standards out there. There is Fremo N, so like Fremo, but for N scale. There's also some other smaller ones. There's a couple Facebook groups. There's like N scale pocket modules is one. I don't know if they have a full on standard, but they have a Facebook group that you can check out. There's also Kato makes one called Kato Mini Dioramas that have some of their what's called pocket line track. They have these little miniature locomotives that you can run on there. They're really more from the Japanese market, but they've converted some of them over to the US. And then the newest one that's come out it was done by a guy, his YouTube handle is Tabletop Railroad, and it's called Hex Track. And it looks like Settlers of Catan for railroads. And it's basically these hexagonal modules that you can put a straight or a curve on, and you can just build them any way you want. And they're kind of an in-between of the T-Trak and the little mini dioramas that Kato makes. And it's something that I'm actually using to make a narrow gauge layout.
Oh, wow. So yeah, a lot of cool different ways to connect with folks. Like I mentioned, I'm diving into T-Trak. That was the selection of the Upload Express modelers, and we're looking forward to getting together and trying to keep up. We've got N scale train boy Dennis Colucci, he's already miles ahead because he's an N scale guy. So you got a bunch of us HO guys just trying to keep up and try to convert our HO minds into the N scale world, and then it's going to be a little bit of a challenge in trying to learn all this, but learning some track, learning some rolling stock. Now let's talk about scenery, because I would imagine the scenery has got a scale as well for some things. And let's talk about ballast to start, because I mean, we talked about track, and maybe we could have talked about this while we were talking about track, but I think ballast is kind of scenery as well. So let's talk about ballast and ballast choices that are out there.
So you have a lot of the similar ballast choices that you do in HO scale. I've used like Arizona Rock and Mineral. I've used Woodland Scenics. I've used Scenic Express. I've used basically every different ballast thing. The difference is you're using a size down. You know, they have the medium and the fine. You're really typically using the fine. And you do have to be a little bit extra careful with the ballast. You have to take a little bit of extra time when you're ballasting to make sure, because the tolerances are a little bit tighter with the size. So you don't want to have rock starting to get into the gears of your trains. But overall, it's very similar. Now, one of the cool things I do like, I'm trying not to sound like a commercial for Kato here, but Kato Unitrack, they also make a ballast that matches their plastic road bed so that you can take it and just run it along the edge and not get it anywhere near the track, but it's going to look realistic. And you can buy that in bags that are a few ounces. You can't buy it in huge bags, but it's something that makes it a lot easier to model in Kato Unitrack. But ballast is just, it's like everything else. You just take and make it a little bit smaller, and you just take that next step down. If you're using the medium size for your HO scale layout, just switch it to the fine size with N scale.
Excellent. Let's talk about some other scenery as well. I mean, what else is available out there? What are some of the products that you enjoy using?
So one of the things that I've really become a fan of, and I think it's something that it's really meant for HO scale, but it looks really good on N scale, is I've started using the Woodland Scenics Forest canopies. And these are really just to make small sections on HO scale, but you can break these apart and build just a whole full-on forest. And I've built an entire module with 2 of these boxes on there and built that. A couple of other things that I'll do is I've become a fan of cutting up the styrene for sale signs and using those for my roads. Those are really just what I've done, and they're thin enough when you're using those super thin sheets of styrene to where you can cut out and make crossings without having to worry about clearances. And that's one thing that I've done. But a lot of times when you're talking about scenery and products and buildings and things like that, you really are starting to get into more of the cutting edge stuff. The size of N scale allows you to do more with the newest craze in model railroading of 3D printing. With 3D printing, you see a lot of these little mom and pop shops. I actually did it for a couple of years for people popping up and printing all of this N scale stuff. I'm starting to see more and more stuff at my hobby shops of these little brands that are just really local that'll go and print a 3D printed model of a semi truck or just a few little details out there that I can go get that I haven't been able to get in N scale forever. So a significant portion of the buildings on my layout now are 3D printed. And there's just a lot of cool things that you can do. One of the big projects I'm doing right now is a custom feed mill. That's one that there's not an exact model to match it. So you see a lot of 3D printed detail that's allowing you to get down to the level of detail that you see in HO scale. Not quite, because our eyes are only so good, but 3D printing is probably the biggest thing that's really bringing N scale. Like, it's really bringing it up to the next level in terms of scenery, and you're able to do so much with it.
Yeah, definitely. 3D printing has just revolutionized the hobby, and it sounds like it's revolutionized it through multiple scales. HO, obviously, and O scale we see printing, and now N scale, and on and on. I'm sure that it has touched all scales and be able to provide you with that stuff that you don't have to wait for a major manufacturer to get on their radar. You can just get it. You can just have it printed.
Yeah, there's a lot of just crazy tools that are coming out. There's just a lot of things where you're able to take a photo now and generate your own model. You still got to know a little bit of what to do. It's not quite at the point where it's like your printer in your home office. There is a learning curve with all of this, and I think that's probably the toughest thing for some modelers, is that they can't just like start. They have to do some practice and experimentation with it. But with 3D printing, you're really able to get more of exactly what you want. Like, if you're a prototype modeler and you cannot find something that is a certain detail that you wanted. Let's say you needed an awning on a station building to look exactly the way that you wanted it to from this certain date, and you can't get that in any other way. You could theoretically take that picture, put it in this generator, which is called Hitum 3D, and you could just create the exact thing and then maybe go tweak it a little bit in some CAD software, and bam, you've got a prototype. The level of prototype modeling that we can do now, thanks to this kind of stuff, is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and what is great, and we've talked to Kevin Tully from Tully Models on the show, and he's talked about the products that he produces. And I love the thought that it's not to replace modeling, it's to supplement that. And it allows you to, instead of having to scratch build every single detail, now you can start to scratch build the bigger components of it and then use these smaller details to add to it. And it just allows you to better utilize the limited, we talk about very limited time that we get to actually do modeling.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example of what I'm doing with one right now. I have a couple of just generic Pike stuff buildings that they're just these blue and white warehouses that you can like kind of put together, make them do with anything. So I'm taking my 3D printer and I'm printing in enough parts to make it appear to give the look and feel of an OSB board plant. So these are the kind of things that you can do. Like I can build all of the conveyor belts and the tanks and everything that comes with it to where I can get something that's like, oh yeah, that kind of feels like an OSB board plant. That has some of the things that it looks like. And that's really what I think is one of the coolest things about this. You know, you can go online and find a lot of models. And I think that you have a lot of creators now that are starting to charge just a couple of bucks for something they've created. And if you really think about what you're getting for that, it's kind of crazy that you can get something that's pre-designed and ready to go for $5 and you're going to have exactly what you want. And that it just blows my mind.
We talk about 3D printing being able to supplement. Is there a product that is not being made in N scale that you just wish they would make, that somebody would create? Is there one thing on your wish list you just wish you could get your hands on?
Okay, I'm going to direct this directly to the companies that make N-scale steam locomotives. I would love a Russian decapod. I know that designing that is a very expensive endeavor, but if you feel like it, I'm just going to say I would love it. It's my favorite non-running engine. Here in North Carolina, we have the North Carolina Transportation Museum, which is where the largest still functioning roundhouse exists in the world. And they've got a bunch of steamers from the 1910s, 1920s. They have a Russian decapod from Seaboard Airline, and it's my favorite engine there. And I would love to see it. I'm not saying like I expect it to be made because making a steam engine is a very expensive affair, but I would love to see it. We do get a little bit more on the diesel side with N-scale, and we do tend to lean a little bit more modern because diesel is just like in the real world. It's a little bit easier to make than steam, but we do have a fair amount of steam, and I'm grateful for any steam that's made. But yeah, we do get a little bit more diesel than the HO scale guys, and we're not a little bit balanced that way.
You mentioned HO, and let's talk about this as we start to wrap up here. What should I start to let go in my head? Let's talk about the differences between N scale and HO scale and some of the adjustments I'm going to have to start making as I head down the 1/160th road.
So there's a couple of things. The biggest one I would say is that I like to tell people it's the law of diminishing returns, where the detail, it's there and it's amazing, but you're going to get a lot of stuff that's like, if it's, I tell people it's like Kato and micro trains are two of the standard bearers for N scale, but Kato does not make the most detailed locomotives. Microtrains does not make the most detailed rolling stock. They are not basic and icky by any means. They're beautiful engines in rolling stock, but they're there and they give your mind enough to fill in the gaps. So there's a little bit less detail in a lot of N-scale. There's still things that have a ton. Like you're going to pull up an N-scale scale trains rivet counter and like your eyes are going to pop out trying to read, because I've actually taken a macro lens and I can read the tiny text on the warning labels for those scale trains rivet counters. And I'm just like, someone did that. And I'm just like, whoa. But detail is slightly less important to N-scalers in that level versus making sure that it works. Because when you get down to that size, it can be harder to make stuff works because of physics. And on that line, you're going to see a little bit less sound in N-scale. There's plenty of them that sound great. It still blows my mind. Like when I put a Broadway Limited or a Scale Trains on there, the sound is phenomenal. And I will try to install it myself and I can never get it that good. But just because of, like I keep saying it, physics, you're not going to get as good a sound as you are in HO scale. You're still going to have all the functionality. You're still going to be able to do the crossing horns. You're still going to be able to do the bells. You're still going to be able to do ditch light flashing on a lot of these. You're not going to get that level of sound. You're also going to find a lot more DCC ready stuff and a lot of preference towards DCC ready. And that's because a lot of times when they don't offer just the DCC equipped, a lot of guys don't want the sound, so they'll just buy the DCC ready and slap a non-sound decoder in it. So those are a few of the differences that are really there. I am in the camp of N-scale sound. If I don't, a lot of times I'll install it myself because I'm a glutton for punishment. And but yeah, so sound is not as important. Like if I'm doing HO scale, I'm trying to cram as many features into that locomotive to look as realistic as possible. In scale, I'm looking more at the entire train itself and how it's functioning, because you can still do plenty of switching in scale. You can still do all of that, and you just really want it to work and be smooth.
Switching in operations, is there seemingly a difference between the two? Is there some considerations in that when you start to put together, say, an operating scheme about maybe not switching every single car, or do you still approach it the same way?
So one thing I can do versus my HO scale experience is I can really start to add some features because of the size factor. Now, it still depends on what you're building, but for instance, I can throw in having to wait for a mainline train to pass. I have a daily coal train that runs through my layout and say like, okay, this is the time that this is coming through. Stop, get off the main, clear the main, got to do that. And you can add a few more things just because of the size factor. So it's one of those like, yeah, you're giving up some of the size and the detail and everything, but you can add these things in. Like I'm able to add these 30 car trains coming through. There are times that I legitimately need multiple power to run these trains through, because it's like what I'm actually running is like it really needs it. So there's a little bit of realism right there.
And yeah, there seems to be about comparison. It just, one thing you have is obviously more room and more capabilities in N scale based on its smaller size, but sounds like you can do pretty much most of what you can do in HO scale and N scale. It seems like it converts pretty well.
It does, yeah. And I will tell you the best uncoupling tool that I've ever used in N-Scale is a bamboo skewer. Like that's the one. Like it is really, you got the length so you don't have to go like down in there. You're probably going to knock a few more cars off the track just because of size and weight. That's just going to happen. So just be ready to put a few more cars on the track than usual. But it's pretty much, it's pretty close.
So probably bring just a little bit more patience to N scale and be understanding of that as well. And probably a little more challenging to re-rail than HO, but regardless of the scale, loads of fun. And I'm looking forward to diving into N scale and learning a lot more about it. And this definitely gave me a great primer. So I appreciate you coming by. And now it's time to hear from our audience as we listen to the answers submitted for the question of the month. This is where you can hear your voice on Around the Layout podcast. You can go to aroundthelayout.com/question. And we had 7 great answers submitted to us for our question of the month. What led you to model N scale? And if you're not an N scaler, what would get you to switch to N scale? We're going to start with Albert Hawks.
Hey Ray, Albert Hawks here in Moodus, Connecticut. After deciding to get back into the hobby about a year ago, I realized that although I still have 3 HO scale sets from my childhood, I would not have the space to run them the way I envisioned, given the restrictions of a 900 square foot house. After attending Amherst for the first time in January and getting over the overwhelming nature of the show itself, I was amazed to see how far N scale had come from when I had a lifelike Little Joe starter set as a child. I purchased a Kato starter set at the show, and within the past 8 months, I've already accumulated more track than I know what to do with, and I've been spending much of my time designing and test running layouts on my 3x5 benchwork. Although I have not decided what era, let alone if I'm going to model a prototype or venture into the amazing world of freelance, I can say that N-Scale has brought back the joy of model railroading by giving me the ability to create my own basement empire, even with the restrictions of owning a small home. Although given the number of new releases and products out there, I will need to set up guardrails to protect my wallet. Thanks again for taking the time to put on such a wonderful podcast. I genuinely look forward to every episode. Keep up the great work.
Well, thank you, Albert, and appreciate you answering the question of the month. And Jimmy, yeah, it checks all those boxes that we talked about in the beginning about space constraints and how N-Scale can help close the gap.
And that's actually what he was talking about, was my exact path back to N-Scale, because I know that the starter set he's talking about, because I had one of those. And my exact path was, when I got back into the hobby, I got into HO scale. And then I realized, I was like, I can get so much more if I go back to N scale. And so I put all my HO scale stuff up on eBay and switched to N scale.
Awesome stuff. Let's take a listen to Bob.
Good afternoon, Ray. My name is Bob, and I am from the Michiana area of Indiana. I am an HO scaler, but one of the things that attracts me to N scale is how nice the equipment runs, the availability of some of the railroads that I'm interested in, and the fact that these modern N gauge work and runs so much better than the old postage stamp Aurora trains and older 1970s stuff that was available. Just got too much HO to make the switch.
Yeah, nothing's more tempting than those 50 car long trains. You'll see 100 car long trains running in a small room.
That's for sure. When you can get away from having to compress so much, that definitely is tempting to be able to run that big stuff.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a listen to David Honan with a little guest appearance from Oliver.
This is Dave Honan from Snoqualmie, Washington. I am not an N-scale modeler, but what appeals to me about N is the opportunity for large amounts of scenery in small spaces. I think of Dean Ferris's recently disassembled Oregon layout and its massive basalt cliffs, or the rural scene Lance Mindheim often shares from his old Monon layout. If I were to switch to N, or add it as a second scale, I would enjoy modeling the grain branches of Washington State's Palouse region, showcasing the alignments that twist through rolling hills between small towns, which each have their own unique grain elevators. Perhaps I'd choose the mid-2000s era, when Watco had an incredible variety of paint schemes running around on the Hooper and Pleasant Valley branches. Thanks for presenting this interesting question, Ray. I'm eager to hear what others have to say.
I'm not sure if Oliver's agreeing or disagreeing with Dad about his choices of where he would want to model, but I think maybe Oliver might be an N-scaler coming soon.
Oh, don't worry. We'll convert them. We're growing. We're as N-scalers, we are growing. We love you, HO scalers, but we're a growing family.
And I'll tell you, you want to talk about an N-scale layout, and it's unfortunate that it's no longer, but Dean Ferris's Oregon joint line is an amazing representation of N-scale and what it can do.
And amazingly entertaining videos as well, if you've never watched them.
Let's take a listen to Scott and see what he has to say.
My name is Scott, and I'm from Rising Sun, Maryland. I have been in N-scale since about 1980, when I got an N-scale set for my 10th birthday. My father had a room-size HO layout, but I wanted to do something different than what he was doing. So N-scale was where I ended up. I actually still have the locomotive from that first set, an Atlas GP7, and it still runs just fine to this day. I've built a couple other N-scale layouts. Mostly I like the ratio of scenery to trains that N-scale gives you. And I actually do something a little interesting in N-scale and run a short line switching layout called the Deer Creek and Susquehanna Railroad, which is a freelance railroad. You can search it on the internet and find some information. But that's where I stand for N-scale. Thanks.
N-scale model railroading as a rebellion against Dad. Is that what we just heard?
Does that mean my kid's going to do Z-scale?
It might be. He may just go even smaller, but yeah, amazing way to look at it and just doing something different than Dad, but still model railroading alongside him. Very cool stuff. Thank you for that answer, Scott. And now let's head over to Andy Day.
Hey, Ray, this is Andy Day from Lucasville, Ohio. And what led me to modeling N-scale was, well, my wife. I'm new to the hobby. I've only been modeling for about a year, but I've worked for the railroad for over 28 and a half years as an engineer. And when I decided to build a layout, the area I had to use was in a small room. And on the advice of my wife, she suggested that the HO scale might be a little too big for what I was wanting, and asked if there was a smaller scale. So when I showed her the N scale, her remarks was, "Oh, that's cute. You should use that size." So here we are a year later. I love the podcast, love everything I've learned from you and from others, and just thank you for all that you do. God bless and happy rail.
Now, God bless you as well, Andy, and thank you so much for listening and the kind words. And it sounds like the wife thought it was cute, so that's the scale he ended up in.
Yeah, I think my wife is in a similar camp. She's like, she looks at me and says, "There's a lot worse things he could be doing."
I agree. Let's head to Pennsylvania with Brad Williamson.
Hey there, around the layout. It's Brad Williamson from Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania. Just calling in to answer the question of the month this month. Question pertains to N-scale. The thing that led me to get into N-scale was when my father's cousin Sonny, returned from his military service in Europe, Germany mainly is where he was stationed. He brought back a lot of N scale stuff from Europe and had a 4x8 layout of his own. And he eventually, I guess, outgrew it or decided he wanted out of the hobby and gave all of his stuff, including his 4x8 layout, to my brother and sister and I. So that's what got me started in N scale. And shortly after that is when Kato started producing locomotives for Atlas. As soon as those locomotives hit the market, I was hooked because they could run just as smoothly as anything in the larger scale. And the big thing that kept me in N scale is that the scenery to train ratio just looks right to my eye. I always wanted to model the Appalachian Mountains. So you're going to need some big mountains compared to the size of the trains, and I can do that easily in N scale. So that's why I became an N scaler and why I've stayed. Thank you and have a great day.
So while Brad re-highlights what you were talking about scenery and being able to model railroads in N scale, another point he made, I think, is really important too. When he talked about Kato and Atlas and good equipment, and it's so important when you're starting out to get something that's of a good quality that isn't going to disappoint or, more importantly, frustrate you and keeps you enthused about being able to run it.
Yeah, this is why I really do recommend Kato to anyone who's looking to start. It runs like a Swiss watch. Like you can't really beat it. They've been building it this way. You just really can't beat it. And he's also talking about friend bringing stuff back over from Germany. I've seen so many stories of that because I feel like Germany's like the cradle of model railroading, but you'll also see a lot of stories from servicemen coming back from Okinawa that have gotten into N scale that way from being exposed to Kato and other products.
Excellent. Good overseas influence in N scale. And let's close it out with N scale train boy himself.
Hey all, my name is Dennis Colucci from Wappingers Falls, New York. And being that my online moniker is N-Scale Train Boy, I believe that I am qualified to answer this question. What led me to model N-Scale is that when I first started getting into the hobby, when I was 11 or so, my parents got me a couple of starter sets in N-Scale. And that was because we were living in a fairly small house for a family of 5 at the time. So it made it easy for me to be able to get started in the hobby while not taking up that much space. And that's been a continued through theme of what I've been able to do. I stuck with N-Scale because I live in a fairly small room right now. And at least for the foreseeable future, I'll be living in apartments and relatively small spaces as, improve my career and so on. So having the ability to have a layout in such a small space while also still having a good amount on that layout is super, super attractive. Not to mention the fact that over the past 10 or so years, the amount and quality of N-scale rolling stock has only improved. So all of that combined, it's really just the perfect scale for me to do what I want to do and really get into the hobby and do what I want while not taking up too much space. Thanks for the podcast, Ray. Can't wait to hear more about N-Scale from you.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and appreciate all the advice you've been giving me on N-Scale as well. And Dennis talks about getting N-Scale because it fits the space and time that he has now. And we talk about interim layouts, but not really interim scales. And N-Scale could get you started and you could move either up to a different scale at a later point, or maybe stay in N-Scale and just build bigger. But it's a great way to get into the hobby without a lot of room, and it may not have to be your last layout or even your last scale, but it gets you in the game.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get, and I've even joked a little bit during this podcast about, kind of pitting the scales a little bit against each other in kind of just a fun fashion. But really the scales all complement each other, in my opinion. And, I've thought about, like, when I get older, am I going to need to switch to HO scale, or am I going to need to switch to even O scale to continue in the hobby? And I think when you look at that and you see that all the scales complement each other like this, it just shows how interconnected the whole model railroad community is.
I look at it the same way I look at hockey. I mean, I'm a big Rangers fan, but if you told me that you were a fan of some other team, I would say, hey, at least you have the right sport. And I think the same thing with model railroading, whether you model O, HO, NZ or any scale higher or lower than the ones I just mentioned, you're still playing the right game. Yeah. You're a model railroader, and that's great.
And I'm legally obligated to say Carolina Hurricanes. Go Canes.
All right. Well, you stole the Hurricanes from my beloved Hartford Whalers, so this is where the show goes off the rails, but nonetheless. I want to thank everybody who answered the question of the month. If you would like to get in on the question of the month for next month, head to aroundthelayout.com/question. There you'll find the next month's question. Read the instructions below to send in your answer to the question of the month, and you may just hear yourself here on Around the Layout podcast. Be sure to head over to YouTube and check out all the awesome content created by Jimmy DIY on his DIY and Digital Railroad YouTube channel. We'll provide links to that in our show notes, aroundthelayout.com/189. Jimmy, thank you so much for coming by and giving me a in-depth look at N-Scale. I appreciate all of your insight, and I can't wait to start working on my modules.
Yeah, it's been a blast, Ray. Happy to help.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.